Today, I'm excited to have Faith Eury Cho talking to me in this on air session. Faith, it's so good to see you.
Yes, I'm so excited. A little nervous, but excited.
We were just together recently
Mhm.
at Better Together, talking about all kinds of things. And
Yes.
it was just so great to get to know you. And I knew
Mm,
that you would be someone that I'd really want to have on the podcast just to talk and dig in to your
yeah.
story. I heard bits and pieces of it in
Right.
our time together, but I'm just
Mhm.
looking forward to getting to know you a little bit better and doing some digging.
Yeah. It's I don't know how I should feel about that. Like, what made me come off as someone worthy of being chosen? I don't know, but I'm here.
It's
Clearly, I
so,
trust you.
yes, I know. And I'm so grateful for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, let's start with you telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do in this season of life.
Yes. I'm Faith Eury Cho. I am a Christian pastor. I am a church planter alongside my husband, and we co-lead pastor Mosaic Covenant Church of New Jersey. We have 4 children and 2 dogs, and I'm the CEO and founder of the Honor Summit, where we activate and equip Asian American women for the mission of God. And I'm also the author of Experiencing Friendship with God.
I love it. I love it.
Hmm.
So you have 4 kids as well?
I sure do.
Isn't that something?
Oh, yeah. But in some ways, like, I actually like the chaos a little, so
You're drawn to the
I
chaos.
am. I am. I do enjoy it. So I think I would be a little bored if it was just 1 or 2, but that's just my personality. I
Yeah.
feel like everyone is better suited for a certain number, I'm sure.
What's the breakdown in age and gender of your kids?
It's girl, boy, girl, girl. So and they are 7, 8, 10, and 12.
Wow. So we're
Yeah.
similar, but we're flipped.
Mhm.
Mine are
Mhm.
3 boys.
Yeah.
Which is a whole other level
It
of
is.
chaos, mind you. It is
It
like
is.
chaos overdose.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Hats off to you.
Okay, so as we're kind of talking about your story, I want you to maybe zoom into a season of your life. Like if I had
Yeah.
to say, okay, where do you feel like God spotlights for you a season in your
Mhm.
life where you were not doing well?
Yeah, I mean, I've shared this a lot and, on pulpits, but it is something that I still go back to is, um, my time in 2020. And it wasn't just the fact that we were church planting during 2020. It was just the fact that everything that you could imagine could crumble, crumbled.
Yeah.
And I'm sure it was similar for a lot of people during that year, but I mean, I had 2 ministries that just fell face down. Um,
What do you
and
mean by that?
well, church planting wise, I mean, we lost everything within like almost a week span.
Okay.
Our team, our funding, our location, everything. Basically everything you need to plant a church, it just kind of dissipated within the week. And then the the nonprofit organization, the Honor Summit, I mean, we were supposed to have our biggest year yet. It was supposed to be like 5 conferences and events, all around the world. We had a full team, we had a plan, and basically it all dissipated. Not only did the plans get canceled, but the team also, left one by one. So that was like a longer off ramp than the church planting, but it was just kind of all at once. So it's 2 things that my husband and I, we were building and that we were
Yeah.
so sure that God was leading us to do it this way, and we were so sure of how we were handling the pandemic as well. Not sure as in happy about it, but we felt like, okay, this is what God has called us to do.
Yeah.
And we did it as prayerfully as we could. But when all that kind of falls, and then as leaders, like when transitions happen, um, it's almost inevitable sometimes to get all the blame. right? When people are like, "Oh, it's because of this that you did or that you said or that, it's all on you." And in a lot of ways I did absorb all of that. I never questioned it. My immediate reaction was, "You're probably right." Like, it's all my fault. I'm the worst. And when you add on top of that almost immediate financial crisis for your family. And we were basically living off of our savings for the majority of 2020,
Yeah,
and not having income. And, and add to that the crushing of dreams because we were saving up to one day buy a house and
right.
all that kind of going away within a couple of months, when we
Yeah,
were kind of close, to be honest, to be able to get there. But it had to go into the church plant, it had to go into survival, and getting to that place around June of 2020 of being just a couple weeks away from being homeless and having four little children on Zoom. I mean, it was just, you name it, the pressure was there. And when I saw the lack, the ruins, if you will, I felt like this is all my fault. It is because I am a bad leader, bad mother, a bad wife, a bad pastor, and I clearly failed, and that's why we're here.
so let me ask you this. 2020 was just a life transforming year
Right,
for
yeah.
the entire universe,
Mm,
right?
mhm, mhm.
So where is it inside of you that you take that pressure?
Yeah,
Like 2020 ruined the
right.
world,
Yes.
and then you start heaping that responsibility on you.
Yeah.
Where do you think, or maybe I should ask, why do you think you're more
Mm,
susceptible to
yes.
taking the blame?
Mm.
Because somebody else might be like, well, 2020, like, look
Yeah,
what happened. Look what's happening all over. Look at the collapse of our economy and churches. And so
right.
this is a tough season for all. Like, what
Yeah.
is it in you that makes it so easy, that makes you so susceptible
Mm.
to being like, guess I ruined my whole life. Guess it's my fault. Guess I'm to blame.
Yeah. I mean, I could attribute it to a number of things. I think for me, the most glaring thing was the isolation. When people say that they don't want to follow you anymore, that they don't want to, or they don't believe in what God is saying to you anymore, or and especially during a time when deconstruction of church leadership is heavy.
Hmm.
I mean, this is before COVID, really. Like, it's been heavy, especially amongst Asian American leaders. It really makes you feel like, well, I have nobody to blame but myself to be in this
Did
situation.
people actually say things to you that like
Yes.
attacked you personally?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I
So
think
you were
some of it,
hearing things from
yeah,
people.
it was implicit and explicit. It was people that actually just told us to our faces, but at the same time there was like implicit messaging there because, if people just disconnect from you, block you on social media, like never respond to your texts ever again, those are the implicit messagings. And then there's like the explicit people that come over to your house saying like, "You've wasted 10 years of my life," or things like that. And you just
Hmm.
think, wow, I am the worst. I am absolutely the worst. I think looking back I realized, okay, I think I I sometimes don't realize, people deal with tragedy and trauma in different ways. And sometimes blaming the leader is sometimes the easiest target. But at the same time, I think I am very prone to blame myself
Hmm.
um, for a lot of it.
And I think that's where I'm digging a little.
Hmm, hmm.
Why do you think you're prone to blaming yourself?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think there was like that upbringing being in an Asian American, where it's like everything is something that we should be able to handle to fix, if that makes sense. Like, it is our responsibility to build the future. It is our responsibility not to get it wrong. Like and I think for Asian American immigrant children, a lot of pressure is on the kids to kind of like help the parents build this life, and my parents they tried very hard not to do that, but I think some parts are inevitable, when they can't understand certain government forms, and
Right.
a 9-year-old will have to take that responsibility on their shoulders,
Right.
when the parents are struggling financially. It's also the kids responsibilities to, okay, well, I guess I got to cut this out, or I guess, a lot of pressure does inevitably go onto the second generation immigrant child. And so I think there is that upbringing in that. I think it's also just a justice thing for me. I feel like as a leader, there is that carnal, fleshly instinct that I do have, and God never asked me to do this, but I do have this thing where it's not right to blame anyone but myself.
Yeah.
That as a leader, that I'm supposed to absorb this, and it's nobody's fault but my own.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, going back to your upbringing and your childhood and
Mhm.
um like you said, I think there's a natural default for the younger generation to bridge the gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a different culture, there's a different language,
Mhm.
and you're kind of thrown in the middle of that, right? So
Mhm.
so when your parents came, were your parents immigrants?
Yes. They were
Okay.
first generation immigrants. Mhm.
So then you were born in America.
No, I would be considered like a 1.8er, if that makes sense. It's I was born in America, but I came when I was like 3, 3 or 4.
You came to America when you were 3 or 4?
Yes.
Got it. Okay, so
Mhm.
you were born in a different country.
Yes.
Where were you born? I
South
don't think I know
Korea.
this. South Korea?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, so you came over, you're like getting assimilated and to this culture very quickly, right?
Mhm.
You're probably learning English way faster than the generation before you and the
Mhm.
tradition and the culture, and you're kind of mashed in the middle. What was your family dynamic like, just generally speaking?
I mean, I think family dynamic. I think it was very, I mean, my parents did the best that they could with what they had. They went through so much transition. And even being a young married couple with young children in America and not having any support system, because we weren't a part of a church from the beginning, it was a lot. So I think they were pretty focused on handling a lot of that, as my sister and I just kind of I don't know. I don't want to go all the way to the say that we took care of ourselves, but I did a lot of the taking care of myself and also taking care of my sister. So
Were
there
you
was quite a
older
bit of
than
that.
your sister?
Oh yeah, I'm like 5 years older.
So when you came to America, your sister wasn't even born yet.
Right. Right, right,
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Okay. So in a way, you have had a grave amount of responsibility ever since you were
Mhm.
little.
Mm.
Like you've been
Yeah.
naturally
Mhm.
absorbing, like, okay, how do I help?
I don't think that's how I thought about it, but I think there was a little bit of that. I do know I was very involved with helping to raise my sister. I wasn't like her mom, but like she did lean on me emotionally a lot. She did lean on me physically a lot. So I did take up a bit of that. I don't know if I consciously felt like, oh, I'm the parent here,
Right.
but I did take it upon myself being the firstborn, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
also being the better English speaker in the
Right.
house,
Right.
and being significantly older than my sister. There was a bit of that, taking a lot of the responsibility. Yeah.
I don't think we ever consciously fall into these roles, especially as kids. It's like we don't have
Right.
the insight and awareness to say, well, I'm in this role and but those roles that we have are roles that are often carried over later in
Yeah.
life to
Mm-hmm.
how we do life, how we do
Right.
ministry, our expectations on
Mm-hmm.
ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and because not everybody in
Mm-hmm.
your situation would be quick to take the blame.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Some
Mm-hmm.
people react differently. Some people are like,
Mm.
That's not on me, right?" And
Yeah.
and so how you react has a lot to do with how you've reacted
Mm.
in the
Mm-hmm.
past and
Mm-hmm.
and some of those roles that you've played. And oftentimes the roles that saved you in
Mm-hmm.
early seasons of life,
Right.
if we're
Yeah.
not careful, can
Mm-hmm.
sabotage you in later
Yeah.
seasons of life. If it's,
Mm-hmm.
for example, just taking on above and beyond what I'm responsible for.
Right. 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 Yeah. I mean, I could see that definitely playing out during 2020, where, there was a lot of things that I couldn't quite control. And I think, and I think I really underestimated how triggered people were just in general on a
Right,
global scale. And a lot of people were in this trauma mode.
right,
And the way they were reacting wasn't to their typical characteristic. And I
right,
think that's where I felt like, oh my goodness, like what's going on? I felt very blindsided because I mean, people that were like, that I imagined myself retiring with,
right,
that I loved so much. I'm like, I will dig my grave next to yours. Like that's how like close I was to them. But aside of them coming out, that I was like, wait, is that really how you felt this whole
right,
time? But looking back, I realized, oh man, I think everybody was triggered in a certain way during the pandemic,
right,
and we were just all reacting to each other's trauma modes per se. And I just kind of thought, well, you are like this because I have failed you in some way. Not realizing, oh, you are probably like this because everything that you've gone through, and and not to say that I'm blameless, but I'm probably not to blame for 95% of what you're feeling.
exactly. And
Yeah.
so in that season of just kind of naturally taking responsibility, naturally
Mm-hmm.
taking the blame, like,
Mm-hmm.
"I'm at fault. It's me."
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What did that lead to emotionally?
Oh, the worst. I was done, Deborah. Like I didn't understand like why I was alive even, because I'm like, God, why have you even called me into ministry if all I'm gonna do with my life is just make a mess of everything? Like what is the point of all of this? I remember, and I was so low that none of my confidants that were typically helpful confidants were able to speak into it. They're like, this is just beyond us at this point. You should talk to a therapist. And even as I was talking to a therapist, she was like, let's extend this hour to like 15 more minutes. Cause she's like, oh my gosh. Like she's like, and I knew, I'm like, okay, then that's bad, because it was just a lot. And I was like, I don't have a prayer to pray. I don't have a song to sing. I'm done. Like cause I don't know what's the point of trying if all that's coming out of me is ruin. I don't know why God even has called me into this. Like I don't, and in a way, like I couldn't grasp this concept of grace. And that's something that really came out of me. Like I realized I don't function from this position of grace. I don't give myself grace. I don't get, and in a way, like I don't think God gives me grace sometimes. Like that concept was fresh for me in 2020. Like I knew he was giving me grace for my mortal sins, like my terrible sins in my past, but I didn't realize he was giving me grace in leadership. He was giving me grace as a mother. He was giving me grace as a wife. I didn't understand that until I realized in 2020 that that was just not a part of the equation for me. But yeah, I was deeply depressed. Like I couldn't get out of bed. I think for a couple weeks, I was just in bed, and my darling husband, he was just watching the kids downstairs and really taking up a lot of the responsibilities in the home because I was just out.
Yeah.
I couldn't move really. Like I couldn't pick up a phone call. I couldn't respond to people. I was done, really. Um, and yeah, it took a bit to really pick myself back up.
Okay, I'm gonna challenge you here.
Mhm.
So get ready for this.
Oh, mercy. Okay, go.
So I love everything you've said so far. I
Mm,
love that the idea of grace and how
mm,
Jesus he offers us
mm.
so much to cover up our wrongdoing and our
Yeah,
mistakes.
yeah.
But what's interesting is you clung so much to grace to kind of
Mm,
cover it up.
mm,
But I'm also hearing that you didn't deserve 95% of the blame.
mhm,
And I think that's an important place to start
mm,
because let's just say you're owning 95% of the blame. God's
mhm,
grace can still cover that.
mm,
But what if you're allowing God's grace to cover up 95% of the blame when you only deserve 35% of the blame?
mm.
And so God's grace is always the solution. But I think
Right.
we have to take a couple steps before that
Yeah.
and accurately gauge
Mhm.
the blame factor. Like
Yeah,
blame and God's grace do go together, right?
totally. Totally.
But in a
Yeah.
way, I don't want God's grace to cover up the fact that you have a
Mhm,
tendency to take
mhm,
more responsibility
mhm.
and own more than
Yeah,
you deserve. The average
yeah,
person
yeah.
doesn't own enough, but
Mhm,
ironically, you
mhm.
own more than enough above and
Mm.
beyond what you should
Mm.
own.
Mhm.
And I think that's gotta be a little bit tweaked.
Right. Yeah, I remember there's this one thing that Alicia Britt Jolie was, saying to a group of us ladies, that rocked me, and I think I bawled for quite a bit. And she said, "Jesus did not die for your learning curve." And that wrecked me because I realized, oh, wait, so my mistakes, my shortcomings as leaders aren't all a sin? So me not getting it right 100% the first time is not a sin? That I'm allowed a learning curve in the Lord? Like, that was huge, and I think that was,
Mm.
like, last year. It's like, it's like, it's funny because I talk a big game, but I'm still learning, I'm still growing, and but yeah, it was huge for me because I didn't realize how much I was putting on myself, this need to have gotten it right, and in the moments where I've gotten it wrong in the past, I still put that on myself. I still think about it. I still, you know what I mean? Obviously a little less now than I used to.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, that propensity to feel like mistakes are sin, that the kind of sin that are almost like the same as deliberate sin. I think there is an element of, hey, we're fallen from the glory of God. And yeah, like a lot of our mistakes come from our fallen nature. I get that. But as in to say that like I'm supposed to be punished for things that I didn't intend to be, from a place of selfishness, but they were just simply mistakes, and that
right.
and that I needed a learning curve. That was fresh. That was new
Yeah.
for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thought. And, even just as you were saying earlier, learning to let go of some of the responsibility. I mean, you've been
Yeah.
carrying responsibility ever since you were 4.
Yeah.
A
Mhm.
lot of responsibility. Ever since
Mhm.
your sister was born at 5.
Mhm.
I mean, a lot of responsibility for yourself,
Yeah.
but also for your family. Like, I'm gonna
Yeah.
take a portion of theirs because I can handle
Mm.
it,
Mhm.
and I'm going to put it on me. So I'm going to take my 100%, but then I'm
Yeah.
also going to take 20% from her and 30% from him and
Right.
15% from her
Right.
because that's my role. And then you
Right.
take that into life
Mhm.
and you're taking a lot more responsibility on your
Mhm.
plate than
Mhm.
actually belongs to you.
Right. Yeah.
And I also think, not to stereotype, but I
Mhm.
also think Asian Americans have a higher tendency to do this. There was a study
Mhm.
done. There's a social experiment,
Mm.
a social concept called the better than average effect. And I talk about it in one of my books called Are You Really Okay? And
Mm.
it's the idea that they hold a whole host of people asking them, how good do you think you are at driving, parallel
Mm.
parking? How kind are you? How moral are you? All
Yeah.
these different things. And the majority of people rated themselves
Mm.
as better than average. I'm better than
Mm.
average. I'm better than the average person.
Mhm.
They did it in the suburbs, they did it in prisons, all different
Mhm.
kinds of demographics. The majority of people always rated themselves as better than average. Clearly, that can't be the case, right, Faith? Like,
Mhm.
not everybody can be better than average,
Right.
except for one demographic.
Mhm. Mhm.
Asian Americans ranked themselves less than average. They
Mm.
were the only demographic
Totally.
that gave themselves lower scores than average. Like, I could do
Yeah.
better. I could do better. I could do better.
Right.
And I
Yeah.
think there's definitely a cultural component to that. But then in your case, also just life, like just
Mhm.
life, you
Yeah.
know?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, yeah. Like there is a deep cultural component. I mean, if you look at like I mean, I know Korean American or not Korean American, Korean pop culture, they definitely are having its moment right now in mainstream culture. And when you see the translations of how actors and singers and they all speak, I think it's so funny as a Korean American when I see the translations and I'm like, oh, cringe. Because there's some cultural things that I see that are not translating correctly. Like they're always saying things like I should be better, I'm not where I need to be, I'm not great, thank you for letting me like be here, like it's so opposite of mainstream American culture. But
Right,
it's such a deeply just cultural thing that's just ingrained in us. It's in our blood, it's in our bones, where it's a vice to say that you made it, it's a vice to say that you're amazing, that you're
right,
better than other people. It's considered to be a great vice. It's like it's a sin in the culture, if that makes sense. And so although I wasn't raised in the Korean culture and I was raised in more in the Korean American culture, which is an entity of its own, there is
right.
still a bit of that where it's like how, I would
The
never
leftovers.
kind yeah, like, I would never be like, "Oh, you need me." Like, you know what I mean?
Right.
I am the Elijah to your Elisha. Like, I would never be like that, you know? But it's like a deeply, it is a cultural thing. Yes, for sure.
And what's interesting is, as a counselor, I always tell people the number one thing that
Mhm.
sets healthy people apart from unhealthy people is ownership, being able to
Mm.
own my
Mhm.
junk. But
Mhm.
in this case, we're talking about not just owning your junk,
Yeah.
we're talking about owning
Right.
yours and other people's.
Right.
And that's
Absolutely.
when it becomes problematic. And
Mhm.
as you said, you started realizing, okay, wait a second, wait a second.
Mhm. Mhm.
They've got their own issues.
Mhm.
They are
Mhm.
not an accurate gauge
Mhm.
of truth
Right. Right.
in my life. Sometimes they
Yes.
are, sometimes they're
Yes.
not. Sometimes
Right.
it's skewed
Right.
because of trauma and
Right.
sin and
Mhm.
just even impulsivity and their
Mhm.
emotional temperament and all of these
Mm.
things, and the
Mhm.
balance of owning my 100% and
Mm.
leaving it at that.
Mhm.
So here's a personal question for you. For
Mm.
somebody who is has a tendency to take more ownership than belongs to them,
Right.
how
Mhm.
does that play out in your marriage? And how does that play out with your kids?
Yeah, I do know that I have a tendency to make it my responsibility to make everyone okay. That if my kids are struggling, then it's my fault. If my husband is struggling, that it's not always my fault, but it could be.
Yeah,
My default would be like, "Oh, what did I do?" But, but, like, I think with growth, I would be like, "Oh, where is he?" But now it's the what I'm working on is, sometimes it's not my responsibility.
yeah,
Sometimes it's not my burden. And sometimes I could just be his friend, and just be there as he finds his healing, if that makes sense, or his balance, but with my kids, definitely there is like that initial, like that gut reaction of, oh, like I should have done this or I should have done that. That is the gut reaction. But I think where growth happens or where the growth is evident is when I'm like, like, no, like I did the best that I could, and I think this is a great scenario. Like there as in great scenario, as in, you know, um, they are given every possible avenue for thriving and success and growth. But hey, life happens and they need to also learn and grow on their own as well. But that took a bit for me to get to that point because guilt is huge,
yeah,
especially in the beginning, being a working mom.
right.
Hmm.
And I think there is definitely a level of growth there, like you said, of learning to unhook ourselves
Right.
from places, people, situations, emotions that don't
Mm.
belong to us.
Hmm.
Learning to let go of that burden with our
Yeah.
spouses and our kids, and
Yeah.
instead of trying to run to their aid to fix it,
Mm.
allowing them to wrestle with God,
Hmm.
allowing them to have a level of independence so that they can
Yes.
learn to stretch their muscles and own what they need to own. The problem when I own too much, I'm
Mm.
not allowing them to own what they need to own. And in
Right.
a way, I'm paralyzing them.
Mm. Hmm. Hmm.
But I totally understand how guilt and
Yeah.
just a false sense of responsibility
Totally.
can
Hmm.
can get in the way of that. How do you feel like you're doing with that these days in ministry? Because ministry is hard. You get so many
Mm.
opinions,
Hmm.
right? When everyone's clapping and cheering you on, "Go Faith." It's like, "Okay, I'm doing something
Yeah.
right." But
Yeah.
then
Yeah.
but inevitably, it's not always gonna be like that.
Right.
Somebody's not gonna be happy. Somebody's gonna wanna,
Mhm.
like,
Mhm.
leave.
Mhm.
How do you feel like you've been doing in that area as of
Yes.
late?
I think I overcorrected sometimes. Like, as in, obviously, I'm still prone to take responsibility, but I have noticed that my hope level has gone down significantly
What do you mean by
since
that?
pre-COVID. Like, I feel as though if I don't try too hard or hope too high, then there's less chance of failure.
Mm,
There's less chance where something could be my fault, if that makes sense. I noticed that about myself mid last year because I realized I don't get encouraged when there's a high, but I also don't get discouraged when there's a low. So I've kind of like emotionally distanced myself a little bit. Like I steward my responsibilities as best as I could, and I'm doing the
right?
best as I can. So that's always going to happen being like an Enneagram 8, like a first child, leader, but I realize emotionally I've kind of placed myself in a way where, like I said, I don't get too excited about the highs and I also don't get too low about the lows. In a way, I've kind of emotionally disconnected myself, so that I don't hope too high or um, emotionally invest too much, and I think it's because I'm still picking myself up from
Yeah,
2020. I'm
I think you're
still,
right. It
yeah,
does sound like a little overcompensation,
kind of, yeah.
like swinging back in the other direction of like,
Right.
okay, you know what? I'm just gonna shut this whole thing down so that it
Mhm.
doesn't hurt anymore.
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now, I don't necessarily think that's a great place to stay.
Mhm.
but I understand swinging to that end as you're trying to kind of recalibrate
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
figure out what does the middle ground look like,
Right.
and,
Yeah.
give me an example of an area where you feel like you've kind of, like, dulled down your hope just to make
Mm.
sure you don't get disappointed.
Um, I dulled my down my hope. I think honestly it's just emotionally distancing myself, really. Not dreaming as much. My faith doesn't have as much imagination as it used to. And
Hmm,
I definitely checked myself on this like last fall when I was like, wait a second, because usually it's around the fall where you're
that you
planning for the
dream.
following year, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and I realized, well, just do what you can, folks. Like, do what you can, team. Go team.
yeah,
But then I realized, wait a second, that's not me.
yeah,
And really checking myself to realize, oh, I think I'm I have a hope fatigue, like when
mm,
you're just when you've hoped for so long and you've been underwhelmed just enough where you're like, let's just hope for what's hopable. Like, what's hope for what's reasonable. Like let's instead of really shooting for the stars, let's just shoot for the clouds. And I think that's where I really caught myself, and so I actually went into a season of deep rest after my book launch. Um, After my book launch, I went into a month of just no work, no travel. I just, made breakfast for the kids. Slept a lot. I realized I was just tired.
yeah,
And I had to get myself back to that place of being able to hope again.
yeah,
And I feel like I'm at the sunrise of that season, after having a season of rest and just even regulating my body,
right.
my nervous system a bit because I was traveling so much. Um, and there was just so much that went into building our conference this past year where it's when you get slashed enough, you know what I mean,
I
you're just
know.
like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to go into the front lines anymore. But resting really helped kind of heal from a lot of that. And so I think coming into this year I'm a little bit more hopeful,
Mm,
ready to dream again. And yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that,
Mm,
because that part of you is so special,
mm,
so special, like that ability to dream and hope. But
yeah.
I think the key is placing our hope in the right spaces and places.
Right.
It reminds me, I went through a season of asking God for something really significant,
Mm,
and he didn't answer the way that I had hoped,
right.
and it was brutal. It
Mhm.
was brutal. Just
Mm,
so painful, so awful, just such a hard season of walking through
right.
injustice and just
Yeah.
just trauma.
Mm.
And so I felt like after that, I decided I kinda landed in the place where you are of like, I'm just gonna hope a little less. I'm just
Yes.
gonna protect myself and just kinda like, you know
Yeah.
what? Like, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna decrease my expectations a little bit.
Right. Right, right, right.
And
Yes.
I sat in that place for quite some time, and then,
Mm,
shortly after that, well, not shortly, a couple years. I mean, I was sitting in that for a couple years. After that, my son had this massive surgery scheduled.
mm,
Massive. And it's gonna take him off just daily functioning for
mhm,
a few weeks.
mhm,
And it was just a brutal surgery, and I was dreading it.
mm,
And
mhm.
one day I was putting him down to sleep, and I felt like I was praying about the surgery. It was coming up in a couple days, and I felt like the Lord was like, I want you to pray. Don't just
Yeah.
pray for the surgery, pray that it wouldn't have to happen. And I'm like, that's so unrealistic.
Mhm, mhm.
Like, really? I'm not gonna do that to myself.
Right. Yeah.
But I just felt the prompting of the Spirit. So
Mhm,
I as unrealistic as it was, I prayed for it anyway.
mhm.
And then a few days later, the surgery came. They put him under anesthesia. They take him back. About 40 minutes into a 4-hour surgery, the surgeon
Mm,
comes out. And I'm like, oh my gosh, something happened. Because
mm,
the surgeon doesn't come out of scrub unless something happened.
yeah.
So my heart sinks.
Mm,
And he's like, I went in there. He doesn't need this surgery.
yeah. Yeah.
And I'm like, this doesn't make any sense.
Right.
It was just the most powerful moment
Mm,
of
mhm.
reminding me that I have to increase my expectations of God, not of myself,
Right.
not of the people in my circle,
Right.
but of God. I have to
Mhm.
increase my expectations. And I'd had them on hibernate for so long
Right.
so that I wouldn't get hurt.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you know, when we talked about that math equation of responsibility,
Mhm.
I'm now imagining you taking that extra 50% that you've been carrying around, that
Mm,
150%, and
mhm.
taking that 50% and like throwing it on his shoulders.
Yeah. Yeah,
Like
yeah,
it's
yeah.
on you now. It's on you.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Cast your anxiety upon him. Yeah.
having
Ab
some freedom from that for yourself. Honestly, shifting, we talk about blame shifting in counseling.
mm.
Maybe you need to start blame shifting and shifting that blame on him, and not in a
Mm,
negative way.
for sure.
Not like,
Absolutely.
God, this is your fault, but
Right.
more, God, I can't take responsibility for this. So I am
Mm,
entrusting it to you.
mm,
I'm shifting the blame, and I'm asking you to take responsibility for me, for these people, for these decisions, for this ministry, for everything that you've put in my heart,
mm.
for these dreams and visions that you've
Yeah.
given me. I'm blame shifting
Mm, mhm, mhm,
and I'm putting it on you. And if you
mhm.
decide to allow it to reach one person, a
Yeah.
million people, if
Yeah.
everybody's angry or everybody's happy with me,
Mhm.
it's on you.
Right. Right, right, right. There you go. There
So
you
maybe
go.
you're in a season of blame shifting.
Mercy. Even that sounds scary. As an Asian American woman, that sounds scary. Blame shifting to God. My goodness. But yeah, no, I get it. It's definitely, definitely. I think that's a really practical takeaway from today's session. Mhm.
Tell me real quick, why do you say that sounds scary?
Um, I am quick to uh ensure that those that I honor are honored in my heart, if that makes sense. Like I am definitely honor is a big thing. Not the one-dimensional honor that I think is portrayed on media and those kung fu movies, not like that kind of stuff, but it's honor is like deeply ingrained in me, and learning to be honest and honor properly with my honesty is a journey,
Mm,
because I don't think it's honoring by lying, right? Or dismissing or excusing,
you're
right?
right.
But honoring with honesty, I think
Yeah.
is huge. And it takes a bit of um I don't want to say code switching because I feel like code switching has a connotation, but like as in it takes another level of thinking and processing to ensure that I am honoring God with my honesty. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. And I think you're right. It's oftentimes easy to just, okay, I want to honor, which means I take 120, 30,
Right.
50% of responsibility.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
you're saying honor, true honor means being honest with myself, with God, with others, with what I can
Yes.
own, with what God can own,
Yeah.
with what others need
Mhm.
to own. And
Right.
that's quite a journey. I'm glad to
Yeah.
hear you're on this journey, Faith. This is such a good
Yes.
journey. And in a way, we've kind of caught you in the middle of it.
Yeah. I mean, I would say so. The sunrise of it.
Yes, I can't
Yeah,
wait
yeah.
to
Mhm.
hear more
Mhm.
from you as the
Yeah.
sun rises and you kind of get
Mhm.
into this next season of what that
Right.
looks like for you.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing your journey with us. Tell me what you're up to right now and where people can learn more about you and connect with you and just be in touch with what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I'm still talking about my book, Experiencing Friendship with God, which was actually written during these seasons that I shared about with you, the wilderness seasons, the painful seasons. It's all about practicing the presence of God amidst pain. Um, and loss. And so there's that. I'm also still working on the church and the Honor Summit for Asian American Women. They can find me on Faith Eury Cho on Instagram or my website, faithyurycho.com.
I love it. Thank you so much for your honesty, your authenticity, and the work that you're doing. And I pray that this is a year for you that you can learn to honor yourself
Hmm.
as much as
Yeah.
everyone else that God has put in your life.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank you
so
for being
much.
here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.